This video is going to focus on subtracting any combination of numbers including decimals. Our first question is 756,527 subtract 465,729. First things first, I need to make sure that when I write this out as compact column addition, that I align my numbers based on their place value. 756,527 subtract 465,729. First, I need to start off from my smallest place value, my ones column. 7 ones subtract 9 ones. I'm unable to do this, so I'm going to need to regroup from my tens column. And I'm going to regroup 10. Now I have 17 ones subtract 9 ones, which gives me 8 ones. When I'm completing calculations like this, I need to make sure I position my regroup numbers at the top. Now I can move on to my second column. 1 10 subtract 2 tens. I'm going to need to regroup from my hundreds column. I now have 11 tens subtract 2 tens. That gives me 9 tens. Moving on, 4 hundreds subtract 7 hundreds. I'm going to need to regroup again from my thousands column. I now have 14 hundreds subtract 7 hundreds. That gives me 700. My next column, I have 5,000 subtract 5,000. That leaves me with 0. Moving on, I have 5 10,000s subtract 6 10,000s. I'm going to need to regroup into my 100,000s column. I have 15 10,000s subtract 6 10,000s. I have 9 10,000s. And last but not least, 600,000 subtract 400,000 leaves me with 200,000. Moving on, I now have 50,000 subtract 32,467. I'm going to put my minuend at the top. 50,000 subtract 32,467. First things first, I start with my smallest place value, my ones column. In this case, I have 0 ones subtract 7 ones. I'm going to need to regroup. But as you can see, there are no tens, there are no hundreds, there are no thousands. So I'm going to have to go down to my 10,000s column. And it is more efficient to regroup all columns at the same time when subtracting from a multiple of 1,000. So I have 4 10,000s. I have 10,000s, but I'm going to need to regroup. So I have 9,000. I have 10 hundreds, but I'm going to have to regroup for 900s. I have 10 tens, but now I'm going to have to regroup to 9 tens. So now I can say that I have 10 ones. 10 ones subtract 7 ones is 3. 9 tens subtract 6 tens is 3 tens. 900s subtract 400s is 500. 9,000 subtract 2,000 is 7,000. 4 10,000s subtract 3 10,000 is 1 10,000. So I can now say that 50,000 subtract 32,467 gives me the answer 17,533. I made sure to regroup all of my columns at the same time so that I was able to complete this question. Moving on, subtracting with decimals. I'm going to write out my minuend, my number that I'm subtracting from at the top, and the number I'm subtracting from the bottom. Hopefully you can remember from the beginning of the video, we focus on making sure that everything is lined up based on place value. So my 2.74 will go here, and I'm going to have to use a placeholder. So the 22, I'll put my decimal point, and I'm going to need to use 2 placeholders in order to complete this question. Let's begin. As always, I'm going to start from my smallest place value column, which is going to be my hundredths column. I have 0 hundredths, so I'm going to have to regroup from the next column. But I have 0 tenths, so I'm going to have to look into my ones column. Rather than 2 ones, I'm going to have 1. And now I'm going to have 10 tenths, but I'm going to need to regroup in order to complete my first part of the question. So now I can say I have 10 hundredths, subtract 4 hundredths, gives me 6 hundredths. 9 tenths, subtract 7 tenths is 2 tenths. I need to remember to put my decimal point back in and make sure they're aligned. 1, subtract 2 ones. I'm going to need to regroup. So I'm going to go to the tens column. I now have 11 ones, subtract 2 ones. I now have 9 ones. And finally, I have 1 10. So 22 subtract 2.74 gives me the answer 19.26. And finally, my final question is 23.7 subtract 5.728. 23.7 subtract, making sure I check my place value columns, 5.728. And like we saw in the previous part of the video, I'm going to need to use placeholders in order to complete my subtraction. I have 0 thousandths, subtract 8 thousandths. I'm going to need to regroup into the next column. As you can see, there are no hundredths, so I'm going to have to move into my tenths column. I now have 10 hundredths, but I'm going to need to regroup. So I can have 10 thousandths. 10 thousandths, subtract 8 thousandths gives me 2 thousandths. I can move on to my next column. 9 hundredths, subtract 2 hundredths is 7 hundredths. I have 6 tenths, subtract 7 tenths. I'm going to need to regroup from my ones column. I now have 16 tenths, subtract 7 tenths. That gives me 9 tenths. I need to put in my decimal point. 2 ones, subtract 5 ones. I'm going to need to regroup. 12 ones, subtract 5 ones, gives me 7 ones. And 110, subtract nothing is 110. So I can say that 23.7 subtract 5.728 gives me the answer, the difference of 17.972.